Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Hare Krishna and welcome to Srimad Bhagavatam class. We continue in the fourth canto, chapter 4, entitled Sati Quits Her Body. We're at text 29, going word by word. Aho, anatmyam, mahat, asya, pashyata, prajapater, yasya, characharam, prajaha, yahav, asun, yadvimatatmaja, sati, manasvini, manam, abhikshnam, arhati. Aho anatmyam mahad asya pashyata. Aho anatmyam mahad asya pashyata. Prajapatir yasya characharam praja. Prajapatir yasya characharam praja. Yahavasun yadvimatatmacha sati. Yahavasun yadvimatatmacha sati. Manasvini manamabhikshnam arhati. Manasvini manamabhikshnam arhati. Aho anatmyam mahad asya pashyata. Prajapatir yasya characharam praja. Yahavasun yadvimatatmacha sati. Manasvini manamabhikshnam arhati.
Aho anatmyam mahadasya pashyata.
Aho anatmyam mahad asya pashyata.
Prajapatir yasya characharam praja.
Prajapatir yasya characharam praja.
Yatavasunyavidmatatmacha sati.
Yav asunyat vitatmaja sati.
Manasvini manamabhiksham arhati.
Manasvini manamabhikshnam arhati.
Aho anatmyam mahat asya pashyata.
Aho anatmyam mahad asya pashyata.
Ayacha patayasya karam praja.
Prajapatir yasya characharam praja.
Yahavasun yot vimatatmaja sati.
Yahavasun yadvimatatmaja sati.
Manasvini manam abhi krishnam ahati.
Manasvini manamabhikshnam arhati. Vaishnavis. Aho anatmyam mahad asya pashyata. Prajapatir yasya characharam praja. Yahavasun vadmimatatmacha sati. Manasvini manamabhikshnam arhati. Aho. Oh. Anatmyam. Neglect. Mahat. Great. Asya. Of Daksha. Pashyata. Chasi. Prajapati. Of the Prajapati. Yasya. Of whom?
whom
Chara Acharam,
Characharam,
all living entities,
all living entities,
Prajaha,
Rajaha,
offspring,
offspring,
Yaho,
Yaho,
gave up,
gave up,
Asun,
Asun,
her body,
her body,
Vat, Yat,
Yat,
by whom?
by whom
Vimata,
Vimata,
disrespected,
disrespected,
Atmaja,
Maja,
his own daughter,
his own daughter,
Sati,
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 Manasvini,
Manasvini,
voluntarily,
voluntarily,
Manam,
Manam,
respect,
respect,
Abhikshnam,
Abhikshnam,
repeatedly,
repeatedly,
Arhati,
Arati,
deserved.
deserved.
Können wir vielleicht das Licht noch ein bisschen aufdrehen? Warum das so halb gedämmt? Danke.
Ist es der obere oder der
Der obere, einfach den oberen drehen. Ja, danke. Translation and purport best to Grace, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. It was astonishing that Daksha, who was Prajapati, the maintainer of all living entities, was so disrespectful to his own daughter, Sati, who was not only chaste, but was also a great soul, that she gave up her body because of his neglect. Purport. The word anatmya is significant. Atmya means the life of the soul. So this word indicates that although Daksha appeared to be living, actually he was a dead body. Otherwise, how could he neglect Sati, who was his own daughter? It was the duty of Daksha to look after the maintenance and comforts of all living entities, because he was situated as Prajapati, the governor of all living entities. Therefore, how is it that he neglected his own daughter, who was the most exalted and chaste woman, a great soul, and who therefore deserved the most respectful treatment from her father? The death of Sati because of her being neglected by Daksha, her father, was most astonishing to all great demigods of the universe. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Gananjana Shalakaya Chakshurum Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Gadamayam Narati Svabharantikam Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Vagishayasya Vadhane Lakshmiryasya Chavakshasi Yasya Te Hridaye Samvit Tam Narasimham Aham Bhaje Paralada Hridayaladam Bhaktavidya Vidaram Sharatindu Ruchim Vande Parindra Vandanam Harim. The verse again. It was astonishing that Daksha, who was Prajapati, the maintainer of all living entities, was so disrespectful to his own daughter Sati, who was not only chaste, but was also a great soul, that she gave up her body because of his neglect. Daksha's position as Prajapati is very clearly outlined if you look at the word by word. Translation also in the purport. It said here, Prajaha is the offspring, and Prajapati is actually the father of the offspring. Pati, the word means father, and Praja is the population or the offspring. So he had a role of being a father. Srila Prabhupada uses the term governor of all living entities, but in the Vedic understanding, a king or a governor, whoever it might be, is supposed to act like a father, either in a smaller or bigger sense of family. You know, if one is a father of children biologically, then of course he has his role as father in a family, but also as a governor or king, he's considered to be like a father. And it's also often mentioned when Krishna is acting as a king, that he really behaves that way and people feel very protected and satisfied and cared, just like children feel if a father and mother properly do their caring duties. So he was particularly in a position where he was entrusted with actually the well-being of all living entities. He's called here the maintainer of all living entities. And therefore, the demigods were astonished. How could it be that he was so neglectful? It contradicts completely his actual role. If he wouldn't be in that role, his neglect would also not be nice. but it would be looked at differently. But his position and status made it more significant. We can also see that in the material world, like in general, also in our world, in terms of planet Earth, that with a certain status or a certain position come certain expectations, which are natural. You know, because if someone becomes a governor, like as here Daksha, or like a president, or might be small in a small sense of a temple president, or up to president of a country, there are expectations in terms of maintenance, in terms of protection, and so on. And so therefore this person is looked at with a different way than a person who is not in such a position or has such a status. So therefore it is also mentioned in the Vedic scriptures, one should be careful to accept certain status or position because of that. Particularly in Kali Yuga, the tendency is to enjoy the benefits of the status in terms of fame, glory, position, maybe riches, but not so much living up to the expectations that come with the status or position. And this is a cause of a lot of fighting and even wars. We see in many countries also now, like people are so dissatisfied with the politicians, and now it peaks with this whole corona crisis. I mean, it steers up many things that were there already before corona crisis, but now it again comes up. And so we can see that that people are in positions with certain status, but they don't live up to the actual role. And people, of course, do not just get astonished, they get very angry, and they start violence against the government they are in. So this is important to look at here, that King Daksha, although a demigod and supposed to be in the mode of goodness, acted in a way which was very tamasic and rajasic. You know, he was very much coming from a place of envy and pride, and he failed to actually deserve his own glory. Because gloriousness comes if one really exhibits or manifests a certain nature, certain qualities, perform certain sacrifice, so that from there, it's like from there naturally glory grows. It cannot be just because I'm sitting on a particular throne and give myself certain titles and names, and then I'm glorious. No, actually, why a person is usually sitting there is because people or the other living entities around him literally perceive and experience the glorious qualities of the person, and then this person becomes glorious. Like Krishna himself, or all the great acharyas, the empowered souls. And we see also that what is astonishing is that King Daksha was performing a sacrifice for the pleasure of Vishnu. So in this sense, one would think, but he's supposed to be a Vaishnava. And so even more like astonishing is, how can a Vaishnava do these things in this way, being so hard-hearted, cruel, like Daksha was? Because the demigods in general are the appointed servants of Vishnu. You know, there are different levels of demigods, but they're also supposed to represent the mode of goodness. Although, of course, there's also some presence of passion and ignorance, as we can also see in Indra, for example, you know, who acts sometimes really out of his actual role as a king of demigods. You know, he does things that are very abominable. And then he has to share even the results, the reactions with different living entities. So we find stories about that. So the big enemy of Daksha was actually his own pride and envy that led to that he became actually an a-Vaishnava, a non-Vaishnava. Because in a truly, like the title Vaishnava is also something that is actually very exalted. A Vaishnava is not something cheap at all, because if you look at scripture, we will hear today from Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati's book Brahmana and Vaishnava, where actually the Vaishnava is even considered superior to the Brahmana, and the Brahmana is the head of society. You know, we see that the Brahmanas come from Brahma's head, from his mouth, manifest there. and they represent the head of the body of society. They give direction. That's their duty, like Daksha had a duty to maintain. And the Kshatriyas, as the arms, have the duty to protect, as also Daksha has. And the Vaishyas, who take care of the economy, they're supposed to take care that there's enough wealth and well-being in that sense. And the Shudras are supposed to support the whole society's being the legs of the body. So, and this is essentially, that is what Dharma is all about, to play that role, or like to serve in that capacity that we are meant for. And then comes the status. From there comes the status, actually. From the Dharma, or the indeed performed Dharma, makes a person deserving of a status. A Brahmana, for example, who is not situated in transcendental knowledge, who does not really perform sacrifice, who is not engaging in the service of the deity, he actually is only by name Brahmana. There's always this mention, Brahma Bandhu, only a son of a Brahmin instead of a real Brahmin. But still it is very quick, as Kali Yuga is somehow or other fostering this quality, that a person still likes to enjoy the status of a role and not so much investing him or herself in really living up to the expectation that is naturally coming with that. And we see also in ISKCON this pride and envy that here was in the way for Daksha to properly relate to his own daughter, which led to her suicide. We see also in ISKCON we had, there were situations, particularly in India, where the young, let's say, Vaishnavas, so-called Vaishnavas, were very much misguided by their own pride and envy. We can hear sometimes the stories from also when Jananivas and his brother, when they share, because they're since long time there in Mayapur, since decades, or other devotees from there, that the troubles that they had there were once, of course, already given circumstances, like whatever, poverty, there were some criminal bandits and all that, so that was one thing. At the same time, what was very disturbing for the people of the Dham, it might be in Vrindavan the same, was the arrogance and pride of the Westerners, headed by the Americans. Coming, because Srila Prabhupada pointed out clearly, a Vaishnava is even superior to a Brahmin, and so like in this whole, how Rupa Goswami says, you know, by initiation properly, taking more spiritual master, you can be elevated from Shudra to Vaishnava. So, and of course they thought, oh yeah, we are that, you know, and they kind of mistook like they tried to, in a sense, how to say, copy the confidence and integrity of Srila Prabhupada by trying to be coming from the same strong place, but in this way offending very much the Brahmins and Vaishnavas there, although they might have been by their devotional practices not up to the standard of what Srila Prabhupada gave in ISKCON. At the same time, their whole background and character and lifestyle was still, you know, very pure and sattvic, you know. So this caused a lot of tension, that actually a person thought, no, I'm Vaishnava, even though I came from the lowest natural family and since 2-3 years I chant Hare Krishna, so now I'm even superior to anyone there in the Dham. And this caused a lot of conflict, and there was a lot of bad feelings was created toward also ISKCON as a movement, and for a reason. And this came from this pride, because people wanted to claim the status, but were not able to live up to the expectation of it. You know, to be really also by character, because we hear there's so many qualities of a Brahmin from the beginning of his life, how he's actually entering this world, how he's growing up and what he's doing, what his mindset is. And it turned out so many people who thought they're so great Vaishnavas, they became non-Vaishnavas. Literally, they stopped practicing Vaishnavism even. So therefore one has to be very careful about claiming the status of something, in contrast to how much am I able to really live up to that. We have different statuses. Also the status of guru is something very risky. You know, we saw that also in our movement, that so many people claimed to be pure Vaishnavas and gurus, and then the material energy overpowered them again. So here Daksha ultimately also caused his own death by his own envy, by his own pride, and by his neglect. Because we'll hear later, like how Shiva simply out of one of his hairs manifested a terrific demon who was capable to just slaughter Daksha, and he got ultimately a goat head, which is like quite a strong signal also. Yes, and I would like to focus a bit on the meaning of Vaishnava as it is given by some quotes that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur is presenting in his book Brahmana and Vaishnava, and that we can hear about that a bit, and then also maybe discuss later on, because I find this topic is very relevant. So he gives a few definitions, starting from a bit what we could call outwardly external definitions of a Vaishnava to a more internal one. And one quote is, "One who is initiated into Sri Vishnu mantras and who is devoted to worshipping Lord Vishnu is called a Vaishnava by those who are learned. One who is devoid of these practices is not a Vaishnava." So Vaishnava means one is literally and constantly and heartedly engaged in the worship of Vishnu or Krishna. And it's not a matter of, for example, simply being initiated. Oh yeah, I got initiation, no, I'm Vaishnava. Of course it's also there, but one has to live up to the expectation also of the status. And then from the Padma Purana it is said, "One who always worships Lord Vishnu and whose eternal Lord, only object of worship and goal of life is Vishnu, is known in this world as a Vaishnava." So I find this one also very significant. One's only object of worship. And one could think, yeah, he's not worshipping other demigods, for example, or people for benefit. Let's also take this internally. He also doesn't worship himself, like as Daksha did, for example, as we all, maybe people on a false ego, in myself included a lot. Like we are self-glorious and think, I'm great, I should receive worship, I should receive praise, I should receive recognition. So there's actually worship of oneself, but a Vaishnava is not interested in that. He only wants to worship his Lord Vishnu or Krishna. So we can have this in mind as a meditation, because it's very deep. Next means a very advanced state to be free from the selfish, as the English term is self-aggrandizement, I think. This absorption in one's own glories or like apparent glories. So this is, then one can call oneself a Vaishnava if one has also this goal, he says, and goal of life is Vishnu. Only object of worship and goal of life is Vishnu. So the Vaishnava has a aim. He wants not to remain in this world and have position, might it be Prajapati, might it be Lord of Brahma or anyone else who looks very amazing and powerful. No, he wants to be with Vishnu or Krishna and go back to Godhead. That's what the Vaishnava's interest is. He has no interest in the material world. And then it goes further, it goes a bit more in the character and consciousness of the Vaishnava. Here a further quote is saying, "One whose mind cannot be distracted from the lotus feet of Krishna for even a single moment, even if he achieves the benediction of ruling and enjoying the opulence of the entire universe, which the demigods whose hearts are dedicated to Lord Ajita aspire for, is to be considered Vaishnav Pradhan, the best of the Vaishnavas." We can also here see, in comparison to Daksha, someone who achieves such high position as Prajapati, for example, and is not affected by it in terms of pride and envy. This is a Vaishnava. Someone who is very much affected by status and position then becomes an enemy to even his own family members. That is non-Vaishnava, actually. In the Vishnu Purana it is said, a Vaishnava is one who considers his actions are in accordance with the order of Lord Vishnu. He who treats his friends and enemies equally, who neither destroys nor steals anything, such a sober person is a devotee of Vishnu. So the Vaishnava is always careful to be in line with the instructions or orders of Vishnu. He wants to live up to what Krishna expects from him. It's again living up to the expectation. The instructions of the Bhagavad Gita, what to do, how to act, or in the Srimad Bhagavatam, how to lead a devotional life, ideally. And then also, that's also a big challenge, treat your friends and enemies equally. You know, that's a big challenge. Usually, of course, our friends we hold dear and we are glad to have them around, and our enemies, well, rather keep them at a distance and have maybe bad feelings, toxic feelings about them. This is possible only if one can see beyond the material body, beyond the material mind. Because as long as one sees the different dresses of the body made of goodness, passion, ignorance, one is in this duality and must see some or other like friends and enemies. But if one is detached from one's own material identity, one is not affected if someone is a friend or so-called enemy, because it doesn't matter to the soul. Friendship and enmity relates only to the body. Like also Vishnu said, Vishnu is completely transcendental, and it's even said he is not positively touched by prayers, he's not affected. As he's also not affected when someone curses and offends Vishnu with whatever harsh words. Because he's transcendental to that. He just sees then how much attention is being given to him. For him it doesn't even matter if it's a prayer or a blasphemy. For him it's just, okay, an Atma is somehow or other connecting with me. On a material platform though it matters, because the soul might elevate or degrade itself. But for Vishnu in a sense it doesn't. It's an interesting discussion that also takes place in the 7th canto when Maharaj Yudhishthira inquires from Narada Muni, how come that Shishupal entered the body of Krishna, being a great demon, and other great yogis and sages take lifetimes. So it came to whether Krishna is really equal to everyone or not, and then this whole discussion develops, and Narada Muni is explaining these things. And the last one of the definitions given by or quoted by Bhaktivinoda Saraswati Thakur, also from the Padma Purana, one whose life is dedicated to following religious principles, whose religious principles are dedicated to the pleasure of the Supreme Lord, and whose day and nights are passed in accumulating pious activities, is known as a Vaishnava. So we can see here that a Vaishnava is a full-time state of being, state of consciousness. That a Vaishnava is someone who has dedicated himself, his body, his mind, his whole Atma fully to the relationship of the Lord, which consists mostly of devotional service, but I would consciously want to choose the relationship. One chooses, okay, what is important in my life, or what is the only important thing, is the relationship with Vishnu, and this affects automatically all the relationships with the jivas we have. Because if Vishnu is the central point of all these relationships, then we relate differently than if we see entities separate from Vishnu, from ourselves. If you don't see the unity as the father is, like the Prajapati is supposed to see all the living entities in a sense as his children, or like where he's supposed to protect them and maintain them. So because they're all entrusted to him, like also in the material world, a mother and father, they should not think we made a child. They should think some soul who has been entrusted to us to take care of them or of it. That's the idea, that one thinks, okay, Vishnu entrusted me with another living entity to properly care and maintain the living entity and to become a Vaishnava, because that's the ultimate interest of every living entity. So when we hear that, we might feel, well, okay, there we are again with the ideals, and how much can I live actually up to that standard of existence? And I also certainly not. But something encouraging also Krishna gives. If you speak of having only this interest, the only desire and goal is Vishnu, or going back to Vishnu, serving Vishnu, following his instructions, he might not be capable to do so. And Krishna says something, or Vishnu says something encouraging on that in the Srimad Bhagavatam, which is also now quoted here. Just give me a second to find one of my many. Jagannath Baladev Subhadevi ki jai, Shishi Gauranitai ki jai. It's not exactly said from. Yeah, Srimad Bhagavatam 11:20, verse 27 till 30. It is stating, the Supreme Lord said, "One who develops faith in my names, qualities and pastimes, who has given up attachment for worldly and Vedic activities and their fruits, who has understood material sense gratification as the source of misery, yet is unable to give it up, such a faithful devotee has firm conviction that all his necessities will be attained simply by the execution of devotional service. So he goes on enjoying the sense gratification that he knows will lead to misery, while condemning the sense enjoyment and worshipping me with pure love." In this way, an introspective person constantly engages in my devotional service as I have described it, and I take residence in his heart and personally banish the contamination of lust. If one installs me in his heart, faults can no longer remain there. The knots in his heart are untied, his doubts are removed, and his desires for fruitive activities are eradicated. These statements might make us think, for me at least, in two ways. It's said a person, although understanding the sense gratification to be a source of misery and wrong, ultimately being unable to give it up, continues doing so, at the same time condemning it. So staying actually in a platform of condition, at the same time, as he says here, continuing executing his devotional service while he enjoys the sense gratification, and worshipping me with pure love. Now we might think, well, wait a second, can a person have this pure love if he's attached or she's attached to sense enjoyment? Apparently from this statement it seems that somehow or other, like the love for God, like maybe the finding of pure, can coexist with attachments and some degree of lust. And sometimes we might feel that also in our devotional practice that we have periods of time where we feel very dedicated, devoted, and it feels pure in a sense. I feel nothing is disturbing me in a sense of desires. I feel I can full-heartedly give myself to what I do for Krishna. And in other times we might be carried away by our desires and or disturbances of the mind. So he's saying these things apparently coexist. And the other thing Krishna says here, that he is taking residence still in the heart of such a devotee. Besides, this devotee is obviously still not able to give up the sense gratification or the material attachment. So here we can see that sometimes perhaps it might be a bit simplistic to say one has to be fully clean, then Krishna comes. But apparently there is some overlap or like some parallel, let's say, devotional dimension being on here, that Krishna is there to actually make us pure, because actually by our own self we cannot purify us like that. We got to depend on him. So from this statement, from the Bhagavatam, we can conclude that he says, if one installs me in his heart, faults can no longer remain there. The knots in his heart are untied, his doubts are removed, and his desire for fruitive activities are eradicated. Srila Prabhupada says also in the beginning of the Nectar of Devotion, when it comes to the qualification for devotional service, he says all it takes is sincerity, the sincere desire to perform devotional service. And that's all, to really get into it. But of course then comes a whole culture of devotional life, But this is the essential item. If you sincerely want it, then Krishna is supporting. He says also, Ananyas chintayantamam yechanaha paripashate tisham nityabhiyuktanam yogakshemam vahamyaham. Those who constantly worship me, he says ananyas, ananya means pure, unmixed, ananyas chintayantamam, with pure mind, so to speak, in full devotion, always worship me. They don't have to take care of anything. I maintain what they have and carry what they lack. So this principle seems to be also here at hand. Yeah, and perhaps you also have some comments and questions in this regard, or like on the whole topic we discussed today. Oh yeah, microphone. Quite an entanglement, huh?
I have a question. So, I don't remember where it's actually really coming from, but from this point where you mentioned that the devotees, especially in Mayapur, they had this problem of being a little bit proud of what they got from Srila Prabhupada and started to act in a certain way. And sometimes I also like hear, or I just always, when I hear it, it like stings my mind that sometimes devotees speak about karmis, like as an Abschätzung. Disrespectful way.
Yeah, condescending, disrespectful, yeah.
And like, I also heard that actually every soul is a servant of Krishna, so they just forget it and then they start to practice karma yoga or whatever. So now, if you take these two together, like, how should we actually really act with persons who are so-called karmis? Because in a way, I think myself, I'm also a karmi. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
So how should we?
I mean, on this topic, the Shastras, or Srila Prabhupada gives many instructions. One thing, or one scripture referred to a lot is, of course, the Shikshastakam in this regard, but also statements in the Bhagavad Gita where Krishna explains what is a true yogi. And one of the verses is in the 6th chapter? No, it comes later, I guess. He's one who sees the true equality of all living entities in comparison with his own self, means in the happiness and distress. He explains how this is also true yogi, who sees the actual, how we all in the same boat, so to speak, who doesn't distinguish based on the two modes, but focus on the Atma, and also relates to the happiness and distress, or like good and bad qualities jivas manifest based on his own experience, so he can properly also empathize with them. There are judgments in the Shastras. They're there, also with the karmis, and Srila Prabhupada often, when you observe his classes, he often says, even when some harsh critics appear there, like where he says cows and asses, donkeys, foolish people, mudha, all these things, he says, it's not me saying that. He says it's Krishna saying that. And pointing, he should not excuse it, saying, yeah, now I can call everyone names because Krishna is in the Bhagavad Gita, right? No, it's more like he makes a point of alarming the living entities, you doing something which is really below your actual integrity or value, If an ass or donkey behaves like an ass or donkey, it's no problem, because that's the form of life, or like a pig, a hog, or they're meant for, they act simply in their frame of possibilities. It's measured by the value the human life has. It says the human life is a life of consciousness, and in this life one can attain self-realization, and therefore a person is only truly intelligent if the person acknowledges this value and acts on it. If a person acts on the animalistic platform, this person is actually degrading itself. So in one way to point it out might be with hard critique, but the Bhagavatam is pointing this critique so hard because it also condemns the ways that lead to such degradation, like karma, kanda ultimately, enjoyment, spirit, or like the materialistic way of life, wanting to make it impalatable to the jiva actually to do so, to appealing to the sense of integrity. And the devotee must be careful how much he or her himself purified of that tendency. Srila Prabhupada made one point, this is in the Prabhupada Lilamrita. It's at a time in India that all these pandal programs, huge programs with hundreds of thousands of guests coming, and there's one remark, it's in this description is like Satsarupa Goswami's narrating it, and Srila Prabhupada is coming down somehow from the stage, and all the people bow down to him. And then he asks one of his disciples, "Do you know why they bow down to me?" And then the answer is immediately given, "Because I'm free of sex desire." I was just reading it thinking, wow, what statement, free of any lust, free of any selfish motive, which naturally made these people trust. Because as soon, like as Daksha, for example, also here, he had this lust for, this hankering for position, fame, distinction, enjoying his own glory, like because sex is not just to grow sex desire, it's the recognition, the fame, the glory, the admiration that one can get. And then, because one becomes a taker and an exploiter, one becomes the enemy of others. One envies those who have something or someone that oneself wants to enjoy. Then one wants to take it away, and one becomes harsh and so on. So that's the problem. And Srila Prabhupada, he made a statement about himself, but yeah, he had to make also many statements that his disciples couldn't grasp by themselves because they weren't mature. Like when they asked for guru, like he was explaining that you need a pure Vaishnava as a guru, and then they asked, where do you find one? Having sitting Srila Prabhupada right in front of them, and he had to tell them, oh yeah, he's here already. Or what to do? It's not like a self-praise in the, in that sense as someone else would do, but he had to also be simply on point, saying, well, what should he do? So, but if for example, the immature, aspiring Vaishnava does that, he often does it out of a sense of, like Daksha, wanting to feel superior, or feeling superior, thinking, now I can claim or enjoy a status, and then the pride can enter the mind of the person. So it's not coming from a place of being truly interested in uplifting the other person, making this person advance in spiritual life, nor it's more like putting this person under oneself to be above. And that's a problem. If one has the intention or like the attitude, I want to elevate someone else, even if we had this last time when we spoke about the scalpel who has to inflict some pain, even if it's a surgery, a medical measure, but it leads to health ultimately, whereas simply cutting someone's throat is making this person die. Right? So pain is there in any case, but the pain can lead to different results. So if here critique is intended, or like really coming from a consciousness of benevolence, loving your next one, then it's different. You can, and the critique also Srila Prabhupada like often heavily chastised his disciples. And the experiences they share is, on one side their ego felt very disturbed, of course, the pain was there. At the same time they could sense there's something else too. It's not just someone being upset because his own expectations weren't met. No, there was someone who had an interest, get out of this degraded position and uplift yourself. Become a Vaishnava, go back to Godhead. That was his idea. and this was the value he stressed. An immature Vaishnava might stay with the point, you're degraded, that's it, and I'm better than you. So, but this doesn't help the person uplift. One should also work on oneself to look at, where do I need still elevation, where do I need purification? And in this way, be careful to whether it's your place to really make a judgment. And particularly with the karmis, the so-called karmis, actually by definition, many of the people that we call karmis aren't even karmis because they don't follow any of these pious rituals and stuff. They're simply, vikarmis. Means they just do what they please out of whim. So would be very, Naradama would probably be the term, lowest of mankind. But these distinctions are there to make us understand where we should not go. But it's not meant to feel, sanctioned to criticize others. In one Prabhupada memories, also one disciple of Srila Prabhupada shared, they also spoke about Ayurveda and applying yoga and all that and certain principles, and how there was judgment among different devotees. This is nonsense, no, this is good. You're a true follower, you're not a follower. Like I saw this for so many judgments, and who follows what properly, And then he said, we do not, as Prabhupada said, we do not follow these principles so that we can criticize others. We follow these principles to elevate ourselves, practically. That was not literally, it was in my words, but he practically said that. Srila Prabhupada pointed out, why do we follow these principles? It's not that we can feel superior to others, it's that we become uplifted and inspire others to do also. So and we can look at ourselves, how good of a job we are doing to inspire others. And then we can see, am I really in a place to criticize others or not? To chastise others. Sometimes it's your role and you have to, even doesn't feel nice, but let's be careful when it's really our place to point out apparent or factual mistakes, Okay, now we got quite lengthy here. Is this satisfying your question?
Perfect. Thank you.
If I look at this question,